right, so today we have Manos Koukoumidis, CEO and founder of Oumi, an open source AI lab, which you can find at oumi.ai. And the name of the company stands for Open Universal Machine Intelligence. And the tagline on the website is Let's Build Better AI, and open is the path forward. So with that, Manos, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Ben. Very excited to be here.
And so I guess let's start before we go into, so of course the topic today will be open models and open source AI. But by way of background for our company, what is the structure of Oumi? So whenever there's the word labs in the name of the company, sometimes to me that connotes they don't yet know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But is Oumi a non-profit, a for-profit? So just the basics.
Yeah, Oumi is a public benefit corporation, which means still for profit. But we have a very strong mission for what we do to benefit the public, to benefit people, and that's why we decided to incorporate as a PBC.
Now, on your website, right? So when I look at your website, I actually see a lot of people I know, but they are called founding scholars. So what are founding scholars?
Founding scholars are academics that were involved in Oumi at the very, very early days. Some of them even before we officially incorporated as a company. And they are also founding members of the company. They have, some equity stake. They're, you could say, imagine like very small part-time, at something much more than just advisors to the company. And yeah, we have, I think maybe around 15 that were very interested in joining as founding scholars, and many more also that's joining later as collaborators.
And then very quickly before we dive in, establish your credentials and bona fides for our audience. So I know that you've done tours at Meta and Google, but so some of the highlights as far as the things that you built that are relevant to our discussion here.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and actually, Manos, you might as well throw in some of your co-founders' background as well, right? So just to kind of establish the credentials of the company.
That sounds good. Yeah, definitely very strong credentials. For one, I started my PhD at Princeton, did the last 2 years at MIT, doing what was called several years later edge intelligence on device AI. It was very early days suggesting, hey, you can put AI on device and here's all the benefits: privacy, lower latency, lower even battery and so consumption than using the radio stack to go to the internet and so on. But then quickly when I moved to Microsoft, I started focusing more and more not on sensory data and such AI, but more on natural language processing. Actually, with one of my co-founders, Osama, we built something like ChatGPT in 2016 at Microsoft. There were no transformers. We were using LSTMs. Even myself back then, I suggest, hey, you know what? Given that we're using a lot of retrieval to help the LSTMs that were not as good, what if we switch from BM25 TF-IDF retrieval to embedding retrieval, pretty much doing what we now call RAG. And actually prototyped myself back then. And we got a lot of success, but I was still pretty much sure it was just not good enough to turn this into a product. And then spent some time at Meta working also at conversational AI for the digital assistant that Meta had and still has. Then I was at the startup, then I was at Google. I was supporting all the natural language AI services, the science and engineering teams, and among others, also bootstrapped the efforts to productionize Palm. That was a couple months before the GPT launched. Built and orchestrated a very large V team. It was, over 300 people that I counted at some point, perhaps many more. And that's how we went to productionize Palm all the way to general availability until that effort was rebranded as Gemini and moved to DeepMind, where me and many of the co-founders continue to be heavily involved. Many of the other co-founders, they've been in Google Cloud AI for quite a few years. Some of them were the tech leads for natural language products. Many of them were contributing to Palm and then Gemini's alignment, especially on safety. A lot of extremely strong, I would say exceptionally strong founding team. And I tell them all the time, I feel very lucky to be able to spend with this amazing core group of people to build Oumi together.
And all right, so let's jump in, right? So one of the things that intrigued me, which made me invite you, is you talk about this AI having a Linux moment, right? So
Yeah.
you often compare your mission to what Linux did for operating systems. So I guess let's start, Manos, at what do you mean by open or unconditionally open? I feel sometimes that we should have the equivalent of levels of autonomy of self-driving cars, right? So
Uh-huh,
open
uh-huh.
AI is level 0.
Yeah. Yes.
DeepSeek is whatever, level 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And then, so walk us through what you mean by open, and what is open today, which means mainly open weights, right? So, but
Absolutely.
and where do you want to take this notion of open?
Yeah. Great question. First of all, fully agree that OpenAI, the company, is currently at 0. You can't get more close than this. But it's not just them. Most other major providers, they're as close and as secretive as it gets. When we say truly open, what this means is that, first of all, you should adhere to the OSI standard, which says for any models to be open source, it should be open data, open code, and open weights, which means pretty much that you give somebody all that they need to be able to reproduce and build this model, right? They can readily do that.
What about
Understand?
Manos? So sometimes I think that it's so you got the open code, open data, open weights,
Open
but
weight.
what about just giving us detail about your setup, your infrastructure,
Yeah.
the
Yeah, let
infrastructure
me
that you use, right? So
absolutely, Ben. Let me add a little bit to this because actually, what we say usually, besides this OSI definition, which I think it's very on point, is also about we talk about open collaboration. Actually, what we often mean by this is that when you provide all this open data, open code, open models, it should be done in a way that makes it easy. Not just you say, okay, I did it, I'm good, but makes it easy for somebody else to be able to reproduce this, extend it, and contribute to making it better. In other words, to make it easy across the community to collaborate to continue to advance this. Because if you're not solving the last part, then yeah, if it's open but people cannot keep pushing it forward, then it doesn't help much, right? You need to enable the community to be able to advance pushing this technology forward. So that's what we think, the future should be. And to just be very clear, right? I think there is room and there is a role for commercial proprietary AI, but we think that the general foundation models and the platform to reproduce them and develop them, and for the community to contribute to make them better, should be truly open. Again, all the things that I mentioned: open code, open data, open weights, and also open collaboration, easy to contribute, make it better. And this is because this, as is becoming increasingly clear, this AI is now the foundation for not just the tech industry, not just for healthcare, but for pretty much all sciences. And it would be a disservice not to make it a public utility, to make it easy for anybody to leverage and contribute to make it better. And if you make it easy, then you're only unlocking innovation for many other companies, including Oumi and many others, to build upon this, their proprietary AI. But the general foundation should be, it's almost like it's so fundamental that it should be a common utility for all of us.
So today, on a regular basis, I use the following families of models, right? So OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, Llama, DeepSeek. None of them obviously are close to doing what you're doing, right? So I guess right now the most that people do is open weights,
Yeah.
but even then, so do you make a distinction between the way people open their weights right now, or are there gradations even there?
I think if you share the weights, that's still great. That's why many times I tell people, even for the efforts that Meta is doing with Llama, extremely grateful. This is helping the ecosystem, helping the community, helping everybody a lot. Yeah, if it's truly open, that would be ideal. I think hopefully sometime soon we're gonna get there. There's some great initiatives. I was talking to some representatives from Harvard, where they have the Harvard, I think it's called Harvard Data Initiative, where they're trying to make available all the data, all the books that are available in US libraries, so that they can be used for pre-training. But anyway, until we get there, I think even just the open models are extremely helpful. But I think what is needed, and actually what we're now enabling with Oumi, because for us as a small company to go and pre-train a large model, it's kind of prohibitive at this current stage, is at least even if you start with existing open weight models, make at least everything that follows, anything from the post-training, the continued advancement of these models, truly open, which means from the data, so you can have a better version of Llama, a better version of DeepSeek. And of course, the weights and everything comes out, and the infrastructure. So that's why we built the Oumi platform as it stands. Sure, it enables also pre-training at massive scales. But I would say even if for researchers now want to do research with post-training approaches, with where a lot of the innovation has been coming lately, the goal is to make it very easy for them to keep pushing the frontier forward, even using a Llama and making an even better version of Llama. And in a way that's also easy for the community to contribute, to reproduce it and contribute to make it even better.
But then right now, I guess based on what you just said, the most optimistic scenario is we get to your vision, but only post-training.
Yes. So I would say for the near term, likely yes. There are some efforts to some organizations like AI2 that are doing also their own pre-training. Arguably for them to be able to develop the biggest and largest models, it's going to be hard to afford that budget. But I would say this is even for just post-training, there's huge opportunity for the open community if they collaborate properly, and I can explain what I mean by properly, to take any existing open model like Llama, and DeepSeek and make it better, or even make it so good that it will move beyond what OpenAI, Anthropic, and everybody else is offering right now. And I can elaborate a little bit about how that could happen. So that's why, yeah, it would be great to move to pre-training as well. But I think there is a lower hanging fruit and a huge opportunity even for post-training, where it's more about having all the brilliant minds around the world working together and less about having a gazillion of GPUs. Now for pre-training, yeah, that would be good to open that up as well. I think being very realistic and pragmatic, it may take a little bit longer. But I could see that this could be a likely outcome in the future where even at smaller scales, you have all this innovation, all this data curation that's happening. And then hopefully if Oumi grows bigger after a couple of years, or in collaboration with many other entities that won't open source succeed, like Meta, NVIDIA's, AMD's, all these accelerator providers, all the cloud providers that want there to exist a strong open source alternative, that we work together, contribute to the same pot to pre-train a large model. Because that's a benefit. If you say, you know what, the model is not proprietary anymore, it doesn't have to be a single entity that assumes the full cost to develop it, whether it's the human innovation or the capital cost to train it. That's why I think the open source development, both because you need much more human capital than what OpenAI has right now or that Google or Anthropic has, and because it lets you aggregate all the compute costs, together across multiple entities. It's a much more cost-efficient, faster, and also safer way to develop AI going forward. And I think sooner or later, it's already, coming to it. Open is going to be the path. Open is already almost becoming the path forward, and it's only going to be very clearly the only path forward.
So let's drill down on what you alluded to, which is, I guess, the right way to collaborate or the right way to move forward as an ecosystem that goes beyond Oumi, right? So for our youngsters who are listening, of course, you may not be familiar with the actual Linux moment, but I was there. I was actually a Solaris booster. Because, honestly, for a while, Solaris was clearly better than Linux, right? So, there's no question about that. So Linux, obviously, and that generation of open source projects, Manos, was notorious for the so-called BDFL, right? So benevolent dictator for life. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about what is your model for collaboration in this world of, I guess, at least even for post-training foundation models.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you were mentioning earlier, our hope was to help promote for AI the same thing that happened with Linux. And as you said, when Linux came out, it was not as good as Unix. People were telling for
or maybe
for
10
Unix.
years, right? Maybe 10 years, right?
Yeah, and actually, perhaps, it took a while. So, but people would say the same things that told about OpenAI until recently. That hey, it was developed by Bell Labs, a huge organization. Nobody has the this great talent and this both volume and quality of talent to do it better. And Linux came out, little by little, the community, came behind it. They made it better and stronger. And the reason they came together.
To my point, there's a
Yeah.
BDFL.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would argue that is much better than being dominated by a single.
No. I mean, I don't. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but is that ultimately what we're moving towards, a BDFL for post-training some of these models? I mean, the BDFL works if the dictator is good and really
Yes.
quality, right? So there's a certain
Yeah.
quality. But anyone who's and spent any time reading those mailing lists knows it can get rough in there in the Linux mailing list, right? So what is your model for collaboration?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's definitely not an easy problem, but I would argue, and just to elaborate a little bit on this, right? The reason why I'm saying this is that the more I was working with models like Palm and Gemini, and even us, working with DeepMind, a much larger organization, the more I was realizing that this is a very complex problem with so many use cases across so many modalities that you need all hands on deck. I mean, to advance it, of course, a lot faster and safer. You need all hands, all eyes on deck, right? You need all as many people as possible contributing to make this better, because it's such a complex technology that it can afford all this innovation and all this continuous development. And also because of many of the use cases, many of the capabilities of these models are almost, they can be researched in parallel, right? With all loose coordination, loose collaboration across different people. You can imagine even organizations within OpenAI, Anthropic, Google operating in a similar loosely coupled way. So now to answer your question, that's the same thing you could do within an open community, where you say, what, we have something like Oumi, we have a platform that makes it easy to experiment with foundation models across all the different training types, all the different model families, whatever is needed. You don't have to reinvent how you do the training and evaluation and the scaling and all these things. And then every time somebody contributes an innovation and improvement, it's done on a platform that is, first of all, end-to-end, so you can capture whether your innovation was in the data curation, the training, or some other step, you can capture that. And then, which means also then it's also reproducible. You can say, here's exactly how I did this innovation. Also, any evaluation is done against benchmarks that are standardized and you trust. And then if you have a standardized platform with standardized benchmarks, you can much more easily reason about the improvements that different people did. So okay, that person on this infrastructure that we understand and we trust with this exact version, they did this improvement that moved the needle positively in this capability while not regressing on all the other ones. That's great. We're going to take all these contributions, combine them together, and train a bigger model. There's the same thing that the open community could contribute all these innovations when, again, they're done on a standardized platform, standardized benchmarks. And then for an entity, not even like Oumi, but it could be, even if it's done on the Oumi code base, it could be NVIDIA or Meta taking all these contributions, saying, I'm going to train a big open model and give it to all of you guys. Or it could be all these entities contributing timing into the cost to train, which just seems based on some use. I don't know how true they are.
How do you improve signal to noise in the following sense, right? So if it's a wild, wild west, then you can go to the Oumi platform and there's like 10,000 derivatives of DeepSeek, right? So then 10,000, I mean, there's a bunch of experiments going on, right? So, and then it just becomes the signal to noise is bad. So the thing about some of these open source projects with the BDFL is the signal to noise is high.
Right? Yeah. I think, let's see. I think in some ways it's reasonably solvable. Where, for example,
Manos, so I hate to say this, but maybe it's already known to people. But you can go to Hugging Face. There's tons of derivatives of these models, right?
Yes.
There's no vetting, right? So what's your answer to kind of the improving signal to noise?
Yeah. So of course, you can't stop the open community, and that's one of the beauties of the open communities. They can take anything and develop anything. Develop any new variant of a model. But I think more than the community developing a specific model, it's about the specific contribution. Let me give you an example. For example, what you could imagine many teams inside OpenAI may be doing to improve development the next GPT, version is coming up with improved data mixture. So say, you know what? Here's some data that I carefully curated to improve GPT and make it better in this capability. And here's, because I'm doing this on the standardized evaluation framework, on the standardized benchmarks, I'm showing you that it moves the needle positively. In this way, you can easily see the signal and say, you know what? Okay, you proved to me at the platform that I trust, with the benchmarks that I trust, that you move the needle positively. Now I know that most likely if I combine their contribution with the other person's and the other person's, I'm going to get a net improvement because yours improves that capability without regressing on others. The other person improves on this other capability. And that's the way I can reason what I can improve. So I think in some ways it could be easier than you could argue operating systems, especially when everything gets evaluated against a benchmark, whether it's a quality improvement or you could say training improvement. But you need to trust the platform and the benchmark that you're using.
Yeah, yeah, and then there's a certain, obviously, at some point, the meritocracy kind of rears its head, right? So you mentioned OpenAI, but obviously OpenAI, first of all, you're in OpenAI, so you pass through the interview process, right? So there's a filtering, right? So in the truly wild, wild west, then there's no filtering. Now, when you look at a project like Linux, there's filtering that happens before you can commit code, right? So over time, I mean, you probably have to spend time to prove yourself before they even let you do anything, right?
Yeah. Okay. Two things. As Oumi scales for contribution to the platform itself, definitely going to have something similar. I'm looking forward, as we grow and grow, to get more strong contributors that we can trust and we can scale the review of all these contributions. But yeah, for some other things, again, like a new data mixture, these are things actually where there's still a lot of innovation that can happen. And again, for many of these things are easy to validate. So, okay, you improved, let's say, computer use, you improved function calling, these agentic scenarios, and I can see the benchmarks moving positively. And I still can prove that you didn't regress on safety, you didn't regress on all these areas. So I think there's still many areas where you can validate the improvements, even if you don't necessarily trust the person. But again, you need to have very thorough evaluations to make sure that somebody's not regressing in some way that it's a gap in your benchmarks and you're missing it. Because imagine somebody's regressing in some way for safety and introducing someone's safety to the model that you don't want to be there. So definitely not an easy problem, but I think it can be solved almost in the same way that's being solved inside these large organizations where you have hundreds of people contributing in parallel.
As you alluded to, right? So it's an all hands on deck problem, and that means that I think there's a tendency for people to think that the only people who can contribute are the people building the models, right? So, but honestly, as you mentioned, right? So data, right? So data is a huge contribution. You could be a data engineer, and your contribution will be some pipeline that's doing some cleaning of the data and so on and so forth, right? So there's many, many ways to contribute to an undertaking like this, correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, and so uh, because you're operating out in the open, anyone can contribute, but then anyone can also put in things that may not be the best or most desirable things, right? So like, for example, data, right? So I go, here, Manos, use my pipeline because it clearly moves the needle, but it turns out there's all sorts of intellectual property violations in my pipeline, right?
There could be issues like that, but I would say when it's done in the open with so many eyeballs on it, it's arguably safer. I mean, there was on the news recently, right? It was an XAI that somebody introduced some unsafe response into a recent XAI model, and apparently it got code reviewed. I don't know how they managed to introduce that into one of the XAI models. But for this, I believe the same thing that Linus says for Linux, which is given open source, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. I usually rephrase this, say for AI, given enough eyeballs, all AI issues are shallow. I think a system that so many people can be looking as a glass box to see how exactly was built, the data was used, I believe that you can cut the issues much more easily in such a system. I mean, that's the reason why, libs at the end up being safer and better than closed source.
And the key here is that you actually only will probably pay attention to my contribution if it moves the needle. If it doesn't move the needle, then you don't spend time on it. If it does move
Exactly.
if it moves the needle, then 50 of you will start looking at what I did, right?
Exactly. And that's that's a very good point. And the thing is that quite often with AI and the research that needs to happen, because we kept scaling, but now we need to introduce new innovation. Perhaps there are going to be 10 things that get tried out, but maybe only one moves the needle. Or maybe out of the 100 ones that are almost equivalent, you choose the one that moves the needle. So that's why, you don't need to be reviewing every single person's contribution. Among the ones that move the needle, you can choose the one that moves it the most. And as you said, then you have many eyeballs looking at it.
So here's something that can kind of slow down the open movement, right? Which is if you talk to the top AI labs, right? So a lot of them are focused on coding and programming, and I think presumably one of the reasons is they're trying to get to this flywheel, right? Where if they get really good at coding, then their AI can start suggesting new AI models or new AI approaches, and they just get better and better, much faster than their competitors. And so, to the extent that that happens, then maybe you don't need all hands on deck, Manos. You just need all AI helping other AI on deck, right? So.
Yeah, it's a reasonable comment to make. All I would say is that I really hope that when we get to this point that you unlock this flywheel, that this flywheel is built in the open.
In the open, yeah.
And likely and hopefully is built in the open before some closed lab gets there.
And actually, it's actually much more reasonable that the open people can compete here because this seems like much more of a post-training thing, right?
Exactly. And that's what I would argue that, many people talk about the GPUs. Yeah, you need them, but I think there's so much innovation and new ideas that need to come up that you can start proving at a small scale. You don't need to go train the biggest model to prove it. And then, it's just a matter of innovation, and you can have orders of magnitude more, smart researchers around the world that could be contributing. So anyway, that's the, that's what I think, like as it happened with many other complex technologies, I think AI is even more trying to be innovative in this way.
So let me give you the worst case scenario for you, which is basically, and this is probably not going to happen, but I'll say it anyway, right? So let's say Meta and DeepSeek, which are Meta, DeepSeek, and Alibaba Qwen are the three probably open weights models that come out on a regular cadence. DeepSeek and Alibaba more than Llama, as you know. I don't know when the last time Llama really came out with something good. But let's say they cut you off. They themselves decide we're going to go the anthropic route. So now your supply of base models disappears. What happens then?
Yeah. That would definitely be a scary outcome. I would like to think that this wouldn't happen. If anything, at least for companies like Meta, they know that it's not something that it's not their business model, and they know that the way they have done this in the past with other technologies, that they have much bigger success if they keep these things open. And that's how they can make sure that what they build becomes the standard across the industry, and that helps them with how they use that technology, because it has become the standard, adopted by everybody, promoted by everyone. The accelerators can run Llama models very fast, and then Meta can very easily use Llama also for all their internal use cases. So I think there's going to be very good alignment of interest from many such companies, including Meta, for open models.
Or let me reframe the question in the following way, which is Meta keeps going, but Meta is falling behind, right? So to some extent, that's true now, right? So, but then your source of open weights models become the Chinese, right? So DeepSeek and Alibaba Qwen. And to some extent, and I don't know the reason to this, I actually wrote about this. There's some hesitation among Western governments and Western companies for adopting these models. I think there's some confusion about what the weights are doing, whether the weights are phoning home, which they're not. I think, if anything, you should be concerned about derivatives of the models because there's many of them. But let's say that happens. So your source of base models are the Chinese models. Will that impact your ability to kind of collaborate with Western institutions?
Likely not too much. If anything, I've seen even US enterprise that we talk to say, hey, we use Pi, but now there is Quen3, now it's even, I think, Quen4, but there's like this new Quen model that we want to try, and they're open to try them out. Actually, especially in some case, many of them suggest that, hey,
I have not heard anyone in production though for enterprise, right? So for the Chinese
I
models.
know
Yeah.
I know many of them that they want to try them, at least some startups we've been talking to. Actually, not so startups, they are like almost $1 billion revenue company. That they want to try them and put them in production because they felt they may be better.
But
Actually, in some cases,
your answer should be no, it shouldn't affect us because that's where we will shine. Because we're going to do the post training, and to make you feel better, part of the post training we will do whatever security audit that is required out in the open, right? So
No, absolutely for this. You are absolutely right, Ben. And my other answer was going to be that before that happens, that's why also we need to be strengthening. That's why we want to strengthen US leadership in open source. But even if, let's say, Meta falls back or whatever falls behind, we maintain that leadership. And when people think about who's promoting the open source, hopefully it comes from the US. And we maintain in the open this capability to build the next open model. So that, as you said, even if it's not just up to Meta to fall back. And that's why I tell people, what Meta is doing, it's great. I'm really glad they're doing this. But if anything, we hope to help Meta and every other company that wants open source to thrive, because that's what we want to do, giving the open source community the structure that it was lacking. The structure that I saw was helping so many teams inside Google to collaborate. Dozens and dozens of teams inside Google to collaborate. The same thing you could do within the open community.
you know who I'm rooting for, which may be naive, is Google, right? Because Gemini is a pretty good model, and then they have Gemma. So my thing is, why not just make Gemma even better? So you're no longer a Google, but speculating, what is holding back Google from making Gemma even better than what it is now? Because it's gotten pretty good for a small model, right? So if you're doing kind of embedded kind of applications, it's probably right there.
Yeah.
But the larger Gemma model, why not? So just to take away that argument, you can still make Gemini better than Gemma, but close the gap, right?
Yeah, that's I think what the problem is. I don't know how much the gap will close, and arguably they won't close it unless they have a good reason to. OpenAI has even stated that they plan to release an open model sometime soon. And I think the only reason why they're doing it is because they realize there is a demand for open models and they want to suck all the oxygen out of other open models succeeding, which means that I think OpenAI will create an open model that is as good as it needs to be, but no better, just so they can suck out the oxygen out of Llama and Quen and DeepSeek. And I think it's the same thing with Google and Gemma. They're gonna make those models just good enough, but they don't want to.
Gemma at least has on paper kind of a rationale, which is basically we're not claiming this is as good as Gemini. We're claiming this is good enough for edge applications, right?
Yeah, but arguably you need to have the very big open models as well, because if you want to develop the best edge model, likely you should be distilling from a very large model.
Which they might have. They just don't tell us, right? So
yeah. And likely Gemma was developed hopefully with some distillation, who knows? But the thing is, what I'm trying to argue is that while they may give in the open some of the small models, amazing, great, very grateful, but we need to keep also the bigger frontier models open as well. But at least we should be building those in the open as well.
So in the spirit of openness, Manos, walk us through the Oumi platform. So what
Yes, yes.
what are you using, and what's available now? And if someone goes to oumi.ai, what can they expect?
Yeah, yeah. So absolutely. So if somebody goes there, there's a lot of links pointing to our GitHub, Discord, which I would encourage people to try out. And what we launched about 3 months ago, the open source Oumi platform, is what as I was mentioning before, Ben, I hope to become, I know the bar is high, the Linux of AI, the platform that will enable all these different people, all these researchers in academia, the open community, researchers in enterprise, to easily experiment with foundation models. Because what we kept hearing from, again, not just enterprise, but even top research in academia is that we're struggling to this type of research. We have to put all these different pieces together, a lot of duct tape together, a lot of effort to do this. Then we try to scale up to do multi-node distributed training. It didn't work, even though it's supposed to work. And so, this shouldn't be rocket science, right? Why not have
So
something that,
so it sounds like it's a if you want if you want to do post training, and let's say you don't have the compute resources, this is the place to do it.
so for compute, we require people to bring their own, but it helps you with anything from even pre-training if you want, but it can help you with data curation, data synthesis using any small or big model you want to. It can help automate all of that. Curation, you can use LLM Judge or other approach to curate and clean up your data. Any type of training, pre-training, all the different post-training, LoRa, QLoRa, RL techniques, using our trainer that is easier to customize if you want, using the Hugging Face TRL trainer,
What do you
using
mean? What do
Vero
you
for
mean? Bring
RL.
your own compute?
Oh yeah, I'll get to this. I'll get to this. So, but anyway, so all of the different training approaches within a unified API, you can easily switch again to Hugging Face or our own trainer or any others. Just change in the config what you want to do, which one you want to choose, and then even evaluation with academic benchmarks, your own custom evaluations, LM judges, all different things. These are all the common things that we consistently hear from both academia, at least in many of the research areas, and enterprise they need it. So now, Oumi, to get to your question, all these different capabilities, you can run them on your laptop, or you can change a deployment configuration, not write any code, just change the deployment configuration, and you can deploy to AWS, GCP, Azure, Lambda, Together, Rampod, or even HPCs. We have tested this as one of the biggest national lab HPCs to, let's say, over 1,000 GPUs. So, like Slurm clusters and so on. So, and that's what I mean by bring your own compute, that we want to make it easy for anybody to experiment in a consistent way, be able to reproduce somebody else's research recipe on any compute that they have consistently, predictably. But yeah, this is a library, which means you need to run, and it helps you do all these things on any compute that you get. Now, for some of the collaborators that we have, sometimes we collaborate and we provide some of the compute, but of course, as a small company, we can't sponsor the compute for everybody. But now, if we were to move to our enterprise offering, that's where we're gonna build our enterprise offering, where we say, you know what, the open source has all the tools that research academic community needs. Now, if you're an enterprise and you want more, better orchestration, control, access, compute, to use the open platform, kind of the Red Hat model to some extent, if you will, then that's where the enterprise offering for Oumi comes, and that's where we plan to make revenue.
So are you
Yeah, hopefully that
using,
answers the
so
question.
what are you using for distributed training, Ray?
We are not using Ray, but somebody can easily use Ray with Oumi. You can launch
I'm an
jobs to.
advisor to any scale, so
Yes, yes, yes. I know. Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So and actually, yeah, I've talked
So
also with John
what
Stock a
about,
couple
so
times.
obviously Manos, we focus a lot on training and models, but as we alluded to, right? So there's the data pre-processing, right? So
Yeah.
uh, I guess you will have data sets, curated data sets, but what if I have an idea of, hey, I want to take a bunch of video and audio files and some complicated multimodal data processing that people now seem to be using Ray for.
Yeah.
So what are your tools for data processing?
Yeah. So let's see. Well, there may be some optimization, for example, we do about how we load data and streaming it when we do pre-training and such applications. For post-training, the most common use cases we had seen is that quite often they say, you know what, I have a new use case, I want to synthesize new data, or I want to curate data using LLM JADs. These are capabilities that will make it very easy. For example, if you have a set of prompts for which you want to synthesize data, you can use any existing open or even closed model and call Oumi to do this batch inference job for you and get all the synthesized data. In a similar way, you can also use a JADs to go and curate the data and say, hey, this example that I synthesized is high quality or low quality, and clean it up. These are capabilities that we provide. And then, as I mentioned before, for scheduling those jobs, you can schedule them on AWS, GCP, Azure, these different cloud providers. Somebody could also integrate with Ray to schedule on Ray clusters or Slurm clusters, which we've already done a fair amount ourselves.
I see. Let's see. So recently, you guys did your first proof of concept, which is this HallOumi around hallucination. So give us the top line there, and why did you start there?
Yes. So HallOumi is, we call it sometimes the AI lie detector, or to be more precise, AI claim verification. In other words, I guess most commonly where people understand is, hallucination detection. If you have a scenario like RAG, where you're retrieving some context to answer questions, analyze a document, summarize a document, anytime you ask an LLM to synthesize, to produce an answer based on context, then what HallOumi helps you do is check that every single part of the answer, every single sentence, every single claim of the LLM, whether it's a summary, question answering, or whatever that is grounded. It's not hallucinated. It's grounded on the context you provide to the LLM. And it has a lot of benefits. Not only has state-of-the-art quality, way better quality than the GPT-4 or whatever models, and Anthropic models, and Gemini, and all those models that are orders of magnitude bigger. But it has unique ergonomic features. Again, not only you get scores per sentence, per claim that you have in the response, because it could be a very big one. Let's say it's a summary. You want to know, is the problem in the third sentence or the fourth sentence of the summary? Because you have a single score for the whole thing, it's not very helpful. But again, besides getting the per sentence confidence score, so you know what needs your attention, you get the confidence scores of, you say, a discriminative model combined with the citations and explanations that you get from a generative model. So, for example, you know what, this specific sentence has likely an issue, and here's, if you want to cross-check, here's the line of the original document you should go check it against, and here's the rationale why I think it's an issue. And we found actually even that is sometimes very helpful, because even for us humans, sometimes it was hard to see the nuance of the hallucination of the model. Especially for many enterprises, they're very risk averse. They don't want the models to be making their own assumptions. So they really wanted this type of experience. So besides the fact that it's extremely useful, because we had many enterprise hallucinations being the main thing that is blocking them from using AI production, it was also great because it was also a validation for us for how we use Oumi. So it has become also a test case for us in the development of the Oumi platform.
So since you announced HallOumi, have you heard of people using it, and what are some of the more interesting ways they've used it?
Yeah. So we've shared quite a few use cases in which people have expressed interest in using it, like RAG scenarios from different fintech companies, to even generally suggesting, hey, I would like to use it to cross-check if the article that I have in front of me, if it's factual, or if it's, maybe when I wrote it, I wrote something that doesn't align with the notes that I kept.
So HallOumi, the input is here's a piece of text, and it just fact checks
It's the same inputs that you would give to the LLM itself, plus the response. For example, if you give to an LLM, here's the context I retrieved, and then your prompt. Here's the thing I want to ask you, or maybe write a summary. What you provide to HallOumi would be the context you gave to the LLM, the prompt, and the response from the model.
I see. Yeah, because the problem with these LLMs, even in the RAG context, that some people forget, is that it'll still hallucinate, because during pre-training, it might have seen data on that topic, and it just opine, even if you provide something in the context window.
Yes, it can definitely do that. Both, as you said, because it's retrieving something from, or retrieving, but it's getting something from its parametric knowledge. And in some cases, it can be accidental, and sometimes it's intentional. We had a case where if you were to ask the DeepSeek model, how do you think, the CCP handle COVID-19? You say, based on this Wikipedia article, answer this question. It would completely hallucinate. Not any single statement would align with what's in the Wikipedia article you gave it. And in that case, I would argue likely it was intentional.
I assume you'll do the same thing for an article about Tibet.
That's a test we can do, yes.
So since you are a huge proponent of open models, I assume that your P doom is low. My P doom is low as well, right? So, but obviously, there are some people whose P doom is higher. Jeff Hinton.
Yeah.
So, what's your answer to people like that who say, actually, Manos, open is a terrible idea?
Yeah. No, while I, deeply respect, Hinton, I think I'm more on the Jan LeCun side of things. The thing is, I do think that, AI is very powerful. It's only going to be getting more and more powerful. But the way it's developed right now, it doesn't make me feel comfortable because all these big labs, they're racing to one up each other in the leaderboard and get to this big goal, the flywheel, as we called it before, or whatever that will help them win this. And they're not investing enough in safety. Actually, I was in iClear in Singapore recently, and Zico Coulter was also on the OpenAI's board, said, hey, what you researchers should do is go spend time and figure out safety. I'm like, yeah, because OpenAI is not solving it. We should be asking the open community, which actually I think I really agree with him because I don't think OpenAI or anybody else is solving it appropriately. And the best way to solve safety is to do it openly. That's why I think we should be advancing open research in frontier AI now, not tomorrow, not after a few months. So the open community can collectively work on the safety of the systems before they get even more unsafe, before they get even more powerful.
So I guess my P doom is low too, but what if we're both wrong? What if P doom should be a little higher? What happens then?
It's a very good point, and the problem is that even if the probability of doom is very small, when the repercussions are so big, it's still something you need to do something about. And that's why, again, I was urging, and I think I agreed with Zico's comment that especially the open community should be working a lot on safety. Because even if it's a small probability, but how small, we could argue about the numbers. If we think there's a chance, we should be doing this. But, for me, more than the AI going rogue, the thing is, if it's learning from human data, it's getting smarter. It will also learn to cheat or do bad things that humans do, right? So, and even perhaps in the hands of the bad people, they will do bad things. We don't have to argue about whether it's going to be sentient or not sentient. Even forgetting about these things is that it's a powerful tool. So the best we can do is promote and help people do research on safety and on building the AI, the protector AI, or whatever you want to call it, that will protect us from bad usage of AI. Because humans won't do it, right? We need AI that will be able to detect the bad use and prohibit the bad use of AI. So that's the things that we should be building. And the best way, again, to do it openly, because I don't think the OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, or anybody else is doing it sufficiently right now.
So anecdotally, obviously, these are just based on conversations. Anecdotally, it seems like Anthropic and DeepMind are much more safety aware or safety focused than OpenAI. And I guess to some extent that has helped Anthropic in recruiting people, right? So they have a reputation for doing more of that than OpenAI. So I guess my question to you is what they're doing is still not enough on the safety front, I imagine, because they're also under pressure, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
they still have to compete as well, right? And now the Chinese, as best I can tell, alignment is completely minimal investment there, right? So except for one kind of alignment, which is, the CCP kind of required alignment, right? So.
Yes, yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. I mean, there's so much pressure to win this. You can imagine all these, I don't know how many billions have been invested in this closed source strategy, which, as I keep telling people, for me, if I were in shareholder, I would feel uncomfortable because, again, when you see there's a better way, more cost efficient to do with open source, what history has taught us, I would feel uncomfortable to be a shareholder. And I tell people, all these OpenAIs and Tropex, they said we're talking about P doom. Let's call about P burst. I think there's a good probability that bubbles that they burst because it's unsustainable what they're doing. But that's why.
Well, Google has ads, right? So they'll be fine. The other two are a little more dicey, right? So.
Yes, and that's why the stakes are high. They need to they need to win the dynamics, otherwise they're gonna burst. Even though I would argue maybe a matter of time, but.
Speaking of which, right? So what you're doing, you're not pre-training, but you still have to invest. I mean, your headcount is not cheap. I mean, these are talented people, and you still have infrastructure. So what is the path forward to make what you're doing sustainable?
Yeah, great question. So I think that's also the difference of how we think about Oumi from day one compared to what other nonprofits or other institutions are doing, which was that we don't want to be the ones, we can't be the ones that come out and say, hey, look at this great model that we built that competes with DeepSeek. Instead, we want to enable the open community to overcome that friction of having the platform that helps them do all this work so they can do it. Because the way it is going to succeed is not Oumi with its 10, 20 people building the best model, it's enabling the community to do it. But when we talk to academics, they said, you know what? Somebody needs to build this platform, but my couple PhDs can't do this. And I can see why they can do this. It takes a lot of effort. So that's why we started from this to enable the community building the initial Linux so they can make it then the best, produce the best research. And that's a plan to make sustainable because, I don't think we can compete by hiring more humans or spending more compute at OpenAI.
Don't you need revenue?
We need revenue, but that's why we started saying, we need to build the best Linux, and our plan is to maintain that and sustain it. But with more contributions from the community, and on top of that, we just started also building the Red Hat, building the enterprise features. But these two are not at odds with each other because in many ways, to have the best Red Hat, you need to have a very strong Linux.
And so the enterprise offering will be basically what?
The enterprise offering will be high-level features sitting on top of the open source platform that when you move from the level of an individual researcher and you go to the level of organization that want better management of all the different experiments, their training, evaluating, perhaps even we want to help to get the compute on their cluster to run their jobs, you can help with all these operations. And also high-level AI augmented operations that help them go through the model development faster than they would normally do it on their own. For example, how can you help them more intensely synthesize the better data? That's the things that are going to be part of the enterprise offering. I would argue that are going to be things that less likely are going to be of interest to the deepest AI researchers, but they're going to be of interest to enterprise that want to get very fast time to value. Or in some ways, they may not be able to afford to have the deep mind. They may not be able to hire the deep mind level engineer so they can differentiate with AI. So in many ways, it's going to enable this enterprise to differentiate with open source AI so that hopefully becomes even easier than what it is right now with closed source.
And I'm sure a lot of the features too are just, the things you have to do, governance, security.
Yeah, exactly.
All of these things, right? So speaking of which, so the open platform, what's the license?
The open platform is Apache 2.
Okay. Yeah.
And for the data, it depends quite often on where the data came from.
And what is the governance model? I mean, is it like it's GitHub open source, so you guys control the entire thing?
Exactly. We currently control the entire thing, and hopefully we get more and more strong contributors that hopefully we also give them more privileges and they can help us scale up the review of all the contributions.
So in closing, right? So let's say we're at 2030 and fingers crossed, Oumi is thriving, right? So what tangible markers will you have to tell you that, or what milestones or benchmarks are you giving yourself to tell you that this vision of Linux for AI is on the right track?
Yeah, I would like to see the majority of the enterprise AI market being powered by open source AI. Hopefully it comes from Oumi. If it doesn't come from Oumi,
Open
it still hopefully
source
come.
in the notion of what we discussed at the beginning.
Ideally, yes. I think it's gonna definitely be in terms of open models, but yeah, ideally fully open source AI that's developed as collectively and transparently as possible. And that enables both enterprise and science and everybody else.
So, and then final question, are you guys hiring? And if you are you fully remote? And what type of people are you hiring?
Yeah, we are definitely hiring. We're hybrid where we spend a day or two at the office. We're very flexible about it. And we're hiring research scientists, ML engineers, and also we need more platform cloud engineers to help us build the enterprise product as well.
And the office is in Seattle.
We have an office in Seattle and we have one office in Bay Area in San Mateo. And as of very recently, one of the team members is moving to New York. We're going to have a hub also in New York as well.
And with that, thank you, Manos.
Thank you very much, Ben.